All right, let's talk about the AP Statistics exam. We're not just going to look at it, we're going to create a game plan to absolutely conquer it. If you've ever felt a little overwhelmed by this test, trust me, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. First things first, let's just put the challenge right out there. 3 hours. That's the total time you've got to show everything you know about statistics. It's definitely a marathon, not a sprint, so every single minute is going to count. So how are we going to tackle this beast? Well, here's our game plan. We'll start with the overall blueprint of the exam. Then we'll break down the 2 big rounds, the multiple choice and the free response. We're going to pay some special attention to what I call the final boss, the investigative task, before we wrap up with the core content you absolutely positively have to know. You know, to win any game, you have to know the map, right? So this first part is all about understanding the terrain of the AP Stats exam. And this right here shows you just how perfectly balanced the exam is. It's literally split into 2 equal halves. You get 90 minutes for 40 multiple choice questions, and then another 90 minutes for just 6 free response questions. And look at that. Each section is worth exactly 50% of your score, so balance is totally key here.
Now, what can you bring into the arena with you? Well, your number one tool is going to be a graphing calculator with statistical functions. You need to know that thing inside and out. You'll also get a formula sheet, so you don't have to memorize every single formula, which is nice. But make sure you leave anything with a QWERTY keyboard at home. They're super strict about that.
Okay, let's get ready for our first major challenge. Round 1, the multiple choice section.
This isn't just about crunching numbers. The 40 questions you're about to face are specifically designed to test the full range of your statistical thinking, and they're spread out over 4 pre-fundamental skill areas. So think about that pace for a second. 90 minutes for 40 questions. That's a little over 2 minutes for each one. And in that tiny window, you're not just calculating. You've got to pick the right method, analyze data, use probability, and, this part's crucial, build a solid statistical argument. The process of elimination is going to be your best friend here. It's a real rapid-fire test of your entire skill set. So, once you've made it through the first half, we head into round 2, free response. This is where you really have to show your work and justify everything you're thinking. Okay, now this slide gives you a really critical piece of strategic info. The whole section is worth half your grade, we know that. But look how it's broken down. Part A, those first 5 questions, that's 75% of this section's score, which means they're worth a massive 37.5% of your total exam grade. That final question, Part B, makes up the other 12.5%. This structure really demands a smart time strategy. You have about 65 minutes for the 5 questions in Part A, so that's around 13 minutes each, and these are pretty focused on specific topics. Then you have a dedicated 25 minutes just for that one big, comprehensive question in Part B. You know, the great thing about Part A is that it's actually pretty predictable. You can basically count on 1 question about exploring data, 1 on collecting it, 1 on probability, and 1 on inference. The 5th one will be a mix of a couple of skills. And see that little note at the bottom? At least 3 of them will need you to build a strong statistical argument. It's not just about the answer, it's about the why. And that brings us to question 6. We're calling it the final boss, and for a very good reason. It is the ultimate test of your statistical reasoning. So what makes it the final boss? Well, unlike other questions that test a single skill, the investigative task throws you into a totally new and often unfamiliar situation. It's designed to see if you can do more than just follow a procedure. It really tests your ability to be a creative problem solver using all the statistical tools you've learned. This quote here really hits the nail on the head. It's not just about knowing the concepts, it's about connecting them. Can you see how a probability idea relates to data collection in a weird new scenario? Can you think on your feet when there's no obvious formula to just plug and chuck? That's what this question wants to find out. So how do you beat the boss? You gotta have a plan. First, read the entire prompt. Don't rush. Figure out what's going on. Then, you dissect it. What different ideas are they weaving together here? Structure your answer logically. And for every single claim you make, you have to back it up with clear statistical justification. So we've seen this structure. Now let's pop the hood and look at the engine. What is the core content that actually powers this entire exam? Everything in AP Statistics is built on these 3 big ideas. First, just understanding how data varies. Second, finding real patterns while also dealing with uncertainty. And finally, using that data to draw conclusions and make actual decisions.
Every single question on the exam is going to tie back to these principles.
So, where should you focus your study time for the biggest bang for your buck? This slide is your treasure map. Just look at the weight distribution. Unit 1, just exploring one variable data, could be up to 23% of your entire score. That's huge. Add in probability and inference for means, and suddenly you're looking at the stuff that makes up a giant chunk of the exam. These are your non-negotiables. The takeaway here is super simple. Yeah, every unit matters, but mastering these core topics gives you the biggest strategic advantage. Think of them as the foundation of a pyramid. If you get these right, everything else you build on top is going to be way more stable.
And that's our breakdown. We've gone from the big picture blueprint all the way down to the specific content that matters most. You've got the map, you know the rules of the game, you've even met the final boss. So the only question left is, what's your first move?